Today, we're going to cover how to study grammar. This title is Study Just Enough Grammar. And actually, it's just study just enough grammar at the right time. Now, I'm going to clarify what that means. So, why do we have to learn grammar? The first reason is there are limitations to implicit learning. And if you recall, implicit learning is the stuff on the left-hand side, right? So for example, reading books, reading stories, listening to podcasts, watching videos, watching TV shows, etc., right? This is a kind of implicit learning that is just picking up language naturally. So are we able to learn grammar implicitly? The answer is no and yes and maybe. According to this researcher, De Keyser, in a study focusing on inter alia, gender and number and using an artificial language, did not find any evidence of implicit learning of form-meaning connections. That is, he did some studies and he found out that learners are not able to pick up grammar naturally just by implicit learning. And then another study by Williams, 2004-2005, adding animacy to the mix. Animacy, for example, in Russian, if you do something to some inanimate thing, then the ending is different. But you do something to a person or to an animal, something that's animate, then the ending is different, right? So that's animacy. Whether something is alive will affect its inflection. So Williams, adding animacy to the mix, did find evidence of form-meaning connection learning. So some learners are actually able to pick up the connection between form and meaning. Whereas in a follow-up study, Williams 2012 took a more refined approach, considering not whether or not form-meaning connections could be learned implicitly, but when. Right? So he found that, okay, eventually, given enough time, learners can pick up form-meaning connections. That is, learners are able to learn grammar implicitly. Right? So there's some evidence that this can happen, but not always, and it can take time. So that is why we sometimes have to work on grammar explicitly, because implicit learning simply doesn't work all the time. And the second reason is that learning grammar actually helps you noticing them. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a noticing hypothesis in second language learning literature. And the definition is here, quote, noticing is the conscious registration of formal features in the input. Learners, for example, may notice that the noun in the phrase "three little balls" has an S on it. They may also notice that it signals a particular meaning, more than one. In his 2001 article, Schmidt, the researcher that proposed this noticing hypothesis, is careful to point out that learners do not notice rules, but rather exemplars of forms and form-meaning mappings, end quote. So the researcher Richard Schmidt kept a very careful diary of his experience learning Portuguese. And then he noticed that when he was in Brazil, he noticed the things that he learned in grammar class. So he came up with this noticing hypothesis. He concluded that noticing is a prerequisite for acquisition. He said, well, you can pick up grammatical elements naturally, but you have to know them ahead of time to be able to notice them and to be able to pick them up. He said, quote, it had acted as a kind of advanced organizer for his later acquisition of the language. Right? He called it advanced organizer and later on formulated into the noticing hypothesis. And he also used this particular term, consciousness raising. It will lead to noticing and then eventually lead to acquisition. And the third reason for learning grammar explicitly is that it can prevent fossilization. What's fossilization? Well, here it says, quote, but more often pick it up as you go along. Learners reach a language plateau. That is, you reach a certain point where you're just not progressing anymore, beyond which it is very difficult to progress. To put it technically, their linguistic competence fossilizes. It's like it turns into stone, like it's just not developing anymore, right? Research suggests that learners who receive no instruction seem to be at risk of fossilizing sooner than those who do receive instruction. Right? So learners who do not receive instruction, their learning tends to be stuck in one place. It's like animals who die and become fossils, and then they no longer evolve, right? So it turns into this fossil that doesn't change. So for example, my Japanese is an example. When I speak Japanese, I still make some beginner mistakes just because I didn't focus enough on grammar. We're going to talk about that later in the practice phase. So the conclusion is that you need grammar. You need some kind of grammar learning, right? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to do comprehensible input. I'm just going to read. I'm not going to worry about grammar. The sad news is that you actually do have to attend to grammar. Otherwise, you risk fossilization and not be able to progress. And remember, we mentioned the Foreign Services Institute in our first episode, right? How they have developed the system of the number of hours it takes to learn a language, right? So the same Foreign Services Institute made this conclusion after years of teaching students. They said in this report, quote, "Another generalization is that some kind of explicit grammar instruction helps most people to learn efficiently. If there is insufficient early focus on form, we have learned that learners may indeed risk automatizing ingrained errors," that is fossilization, right? And as for myself, I have studied all these different textbooks when it comes to Japanese grammar. And this one has to do with listening, but it also deals with some grammatical elements, like how people simplify words in their speech so that I can understand utterances that are simplified. For example, instead of saying I'm going to, you'll say I'm gonna, right? So in Japanese, instead of saying している, they'll say してる, right? Sometimes they'll simplify their speech. So this textbook talks about, you can say, oral grammar, right? So I studied all these textbooks, and I attended Japanese language classes in Kyoto University, and they taught grammar in the lessons. They actually went into a lot of details. They got into a lot of rules that's really difficult to remember. But it really helped, even though I thought that they probably went into too much detail on stuff that's rarely seen. And I also attended some Japanese linguistics courses in Kyoto. One particular element that I learned that's particularly helpful was the pitch accent system in Japanese. And so it helped me figuring out the pitch accent system, and I was able to pronounce the words correctly. So sometimes if you're at a higher level, it's good to dig into the deeper truths of the language, right? Learn the linguistics of the language, learn how the language works in a deeper level, and learn the mechanics and the syntax and the phonology and the phonetics of the language, just so that you can have a deeper understanding of how this language works if you're at a higher level. Okay, now we talked about why we have to learn grammar. Now let's talk about how we can learn grammar. First, there is the output-focused method, and then there's the input-focused method. Most of us are familiar with the output-focused method. For example,